We have been talking a lot on this channel about the Western and the Eastern Roman Empire. So basically the Roman Empire after the final split into an Eastern and a Western half after 395 AD. But we haven't yet compared these two empires regarding some important statistics. Which of those two Roman empires was more powerful? Which had a stronger army? Which one was larger? Which had a higher population? Which one of those had the richer provinces, the more impressive cities, and the better geography? So it is finally time to let the Eastern and the Western Roman Empire battle it out. It had been a long time coming. It was only a matter of time until the Roman Empire was to split apart into rivaling sub-empires. We saw this happening already once in the crisis of the 3rd century. Indeed, many forget that the Roman Empire was already before split into 3 empires for a short while. In the west, there was the Gallic Empire. In the center, there was the core Roman Empire. And in the east, there was the Palmyrene Empire. The heroic Emperor Aurelian reunited these empires with force in the 270s AD, but not long later, the Emperor Diocletian realized that the empire had become so unstable that at this point it was no longer possible to have just one emperor. And so it was divided into 4 parts. From that time onwards, more and more it would crystallize that there were 2 major halves of the Roman Empire: the Greek-speaking East and the Latin-speaking West. For a brief moment, the empire was reunited again under one sole emperor, as so happened with Constantine, with Julian, and with Theodosius. But when Theodosius died, the final split of the empire came in 395 AD, leaving these vast 2 halves of the Roman Empire to his astoundingly incapable sons. As the years went by, the estrangement between the 2 halves grew, especially after the disaster of Adrianople in 378 AD, when the Goths were in the aftermath allowed to settle in Illyricum. This had drawn a wedge between the West and the East and had further increased the estrangement. Now you might say, this whole East versus West comparison is stupid, since it is absolutely clear that the East was superior because the West fell. Ergo, the Eastern Roman Empire was the superior one. Well, that is why I am making this video, so that we can look at some stats, and maybe this will also help us understand why the West fell sooner than the East. So then let's look at some stats, and keep in mind that these statistics compare the Eastern and Western empires in the year of the splitting, so in 395 AD. 1. Land area. The Western Roman Empire had a land area of about 2 million square kilometers at the division in 395 AD, while the Eastern Roman Empire had slightly less, around 1.9 million square kilometers of land area in that same year. So size-wise, both empires were pretty similar. Compared to the Roman Empire at its peak, which had an impressive 5 million square kilometers of land area in 117 AD, both empire halves were thus less than half the size of the original Roman Empire during its peak of power under the legendary Emperor Trajan. So regarding land area, the West wins. 2. Population. Now this is of course, as you can imagine, a tough one, because getting exact numbers on the population of the Roman Empire is a lot more difficult than estimating the land area size. However, I made a detailed video about the population of the late Roman Empire, which you can watch here. And I used data based on several different estimates found in literature. The most commonly found value is that the Roman Empire had a peak population of 60 to 70 million, and the later Roman Empire in the 4th century had shrunk population-wise to around 55 or 56 million. A pretty brutal, more than 10% population loss. When the empire was divided in 395, 40% of the Romans lived in the west, while 60% lived in the east, and so the west had 22 million inhabitants, while the east had 34 million. So the east wins here. 3. Cities. Which of the 2 Roman empires had the larger and more splendorous cities? Now of course, the Western Roman Empire had Rome itself, the mother city, the city where it all began, from which the whole empire emerged. Even in 395 AD, Rome still had 800,000 inhabitants and was still the largest city in both East and West. The West also had other impressive cities, such as the imperial capital Mediolanum, which probably had more than 100,000 inhabitants, and Carthage in Africa, which was very large and probably had a population of around 350,000 up to 500,000 in that time. This is of course very impressive. However, the East had many more large cities. Apart from Rome, Carthage and Mediolanum, most other cities in the West were quite a lot below 100,000 inhabitants, and especially the province of Britannia had very small cities. But in the East you would find many super impressive cities. There was Alexandria, which in 395 AD must have had around 500,000 inhabitants. Then there was of course Antioch, which also had a similar number of residents. Then there was Ephesus in Asia Minor, also boasting around 500,000 population. Then there was Smyrna with 250,000 and Pergamon with 150,000. And then of course there was the capital of the Eastern Roman Empire, Constantinople itself, with at that time possibly around 300 to 400,000 inhabitants. So we see while the West certainly held the most impressive and splendorous city of antiquity, Rome itself, the East just had a massive number of large cities, far more than the West. And so the East wins. Hello dear friends of late Roman history, it's me, Sebastian, the creator and the person behind Maiorianus. I apologize for this brief interruption, but I wanted to ask for your help to support Maiorianus and to support the channel so that we can keep Maiorianus a channel about late Roman history. As you know, the YouTube algorithm is often not very kind to niche topics such as late Roman history, and therefore I really need your support in order to keep Maiorianus the way it is, to keep it a channel about late Roman history so that we can continue to explore this most fascinating era of the late Roman Empire, and so that we won't have to turn Maiorianus into a mainstream history channel. Only a few euros per month of support can really make all the difference. Thanks for considering to support me via Patreon or via a YouTube membership. I cannot thank you people enough. I thank you from the bottom of my heart. Majorian himself would be proud. Thank you friends of late Roman history, and back to the video. 4. Provinces. Now you can already guess who had the better provinces. As you can imagine, and I mentioned this very often in previous videos, the West had the worst provinces. That is why the split was such a disaster for the Roman Empire as a whole, because it was never meant to be split. First of all, the West had the good provinces of Italy itself, of course, then Africa and parts of Hispania, and the southern part of Gallia. But it had the disaster province of Britannia, which basically only spawned usurper after usurper. And northern Gallia was a depopulated and poor area after the crisis of the 3rd century. Now compare that with the East, which had Greece, Anatolia, the Levant and Egypt, all areas that had been urbanized and part of large, highly developed empires even before Rome. The East was also at the Silk Road, allowing for trade with Persia and even with faraway India and China. You can then of course imagine that consequently the East had the better finances than the West, because the taxation of wealthier provinces with more population allowed for the East to just have a much better tax base and hence a better economy. In addition, the East had no disaster province such as Britannia, so there was no usurper hotspot in the East where every 20 to 50 years huge armies would suddenly declare war on you and march on Constantinople. But this is what the West had to deal with on a constant basis. So here too, the East wins. 5. Geography. One of the biggest reasons why the East survived when the West fell was quite simply geography. Let us look for a while at the East compared to the West. Basically, what made the East so powerful was that the provinces of Egypt and the Levant were not reachable for the barbarian tribes from the north. Almost impossible. There was just one single recorded barbarian raid through the Caspian Mountains by some crazy Huns into Syria in the year 395. The Black and the Caspian Seas and the Caucasus Mountains in between formed a giant barrier which prevented raids from the north. And we saw that when the natural barriers were not strong enough, The East did indeed suffer brutal defeats, such as in Adrianople in 378 against the Goths, which started the whole negative chain reaction in the first place, and even allowed the Goths to rampage through the Balkans in the following years, simply because they were able to pass the Danube River. So basically speaking, through a better defensible geography, the richest provinces of Egypt and the Levant could not be reached by foreign invaders from the north, and hence the tax base of the Eastern Roman Empire was secure. And the Bosphorus Strait was defended by Constantinople, which even already in 395 AD was a bulwark. Compare that to the west, where basically all provinces are quite easily reachable by land once the Limes border has been stormed. Only Africa was the single province that was hard to reach. But unfortunately, the Strait of Gibraltar allowed the Vandals to cross into Africa in 429, and that destroyed the majority of the Western Roman tax base. Thus, the finances of the West were definitely ruined after the 430s, and hence the West could not upkeep its armies anymore or recruit new armies. So the East wins again. 6. Army size. Now this is of course the interesting one. Who had the larger armies? If we look at the conflicts between the Eastern and the Western Roman Empire in the 4th century, of which there were quite a few, we might come to believe that the West had the smaller or weaker armies. The West lost with Magnentius against Constantius II, with Magnus Maximus against Theodosius, and then again with Eugenius against Theodosius. But were the Western armies really weaker? Luckily, we can make some educated guesses based on some admittedly quite lacking evidence. Fortunately, we have the Notitia Dignitatum, which was written around 420 AD for the West and at the latest in 395 AD for the East. This unique document lists 157 army units for the East and 181 for the West. These include, of course, Comitatenses, the elite mobile field army, and the Limitanei, the lower equipped border defense units. So by number of units, the West seems to win. The problem, however, is that the Notitia does not list the size of the units. However, we can assume that they were of similar size in East and West. The Eastern Roman chronicler Agatias wrote in the 6th century that the nominal strength of the entire Roman army was 645,000 men, meaning including the by then lost Western army size, and that by his time the Eastern Roman Empire had a strength of 150,000 men. Modern scholars estimate the entire army strength between 400 and 600,000 men for both East and West, with more tending towards the lower end size. So if the entire army then counted 400,000 men, and after the fall of the West there were 150,000 men remaining in the East, we can therefore assume that the army of the West was larger, which fits the higher unit number given in the Notitia. So my estimate is 250,000 men in the West and 150,000 in the East. Take this, however, with a grain of salt, as exact numbers are impossible to reconstruct. However, the Notitia lists more units in the West than in the East, so it is quite probable that the West had the larger army. However, it is impossible to know by how much. So the West wins here, despite having lost often to the East. But this had more to do with better Eastern military commanders and sometimes just bad luck on part of the West. 7. Emperors. The emperors of the East, from the split in 395 AD until the fall of the West, were in chronological order: Arcadius, Theodosius II, Marcian, Leo I, Zeno, and for a short while Basiliscus and then again Zeno. Out of those, I would say that Theodosius II, Marcian, Leo and Zeno were all capable emperors, with Leo being my favorite. In the West, meanwhile, there were from 395 AD until 476 AD the following emperors and counter-emperors or usurpers: Honorius, Marcus, Gratian, Constantine III, Priscus Attalus, Maximus, Jovinus, Sebastianus, Heraclianus, Constantius III, Johannes, Valentinian III, Bonifacius, Petronius Maximus, Avitus, Majorian, Libius Severus, Anthemius, Arvandus, Romanus, Olybrius, Glycerius, Julius Nepos, and Romulus Augustus. So we have in the same time span in which the East had 6 emperors including usurpers, 24 emperors including usurpers in the West. So you can already see what utter chaos there was in the West after the invasions of 407. And out of those 24, there were only Constantius III, Ioannis, Anthemius, and of course Majorian himself who deserved the name good emperors, and only Majorian and Constantius III were truly great, with a few okayish ones such as Glycerius or Julius Nepos. So basically the ratio of good emperors in the West was much lower than in the East, which just stems from the fact that the situation had become a complete chaos after the barbarian invasions of 407 and following years. So here too the East wins. So to sum it up, the East had the higher population, the more prosperous and larger cities, the richer provinces, a better defendable geography, and a higher percentage of capable emperors, and the West would only win with regards to the army size and the land area. It is no wonder then that the East survived and the West fell, since the Roman Empire was never meant to be ruled by two separate emperors, who oftentimes even fought against each other in brutal civil wars, with the West most often losing, which by the way crippled the Western army significantly. The Roman Empire was always intended to be ruled as a united empire where one hand washes the other, where one part helps the other. But after 395 AD, this was less and less the case, and the East did actually not always help the West. But as soon as the West had fallen, the fate of the East was also sealed, and it was only a matter of time until the East would also fall. And please like and subscribe so that you won't miss any future videos on the fascinating era of the late Roman Empire. And I would especially like to thank our new Restitutor Orbis supporter, Marco Ceccini. I'm especially honored to have Marco Ceccini here, the best Maxentius reenactor with whom I did many collaborations on Maxentius. Thank you so much, Marco, for supporting Maiorianus in this utmost generous form. I cannot thank you enough. And I would like to thank our new Caesar supporter, Anthony Emmel. Thank you so much, Anthony Emmel, for supporting Maiorianus in such a generous way. And I would like to thank everybody who supports Maiorianus in any form. Thank you so much, friends, for supporting me so that I can continue making videos about late Roman history. Gratias tibiago, amici. I really want to thank each and everyone who is supporting this channel in any form. And if you want to learn more about the sons of Constantine, you can watch this video in the upper right corner. But if you want to learn more about how paganism was suppressed by Christianity, you can watch the other video in the lower right corner. I say thanks again to all friends of Roman history, gratias tibiago and bene valete.